And that's the band Millions with their single 19. It's 25 minutes to 7 o'clock here on FM 99.3 on the long way home. And my final guest for the show tonight is a man named Benito Di Fonzo. He's a journalist, playwright, poet and performer, and he's written for the Sydney Morning Herald, the Sun Herald, the Australian, the Bardfly magazine, where he was editor. He's performed narrative neobeat poems and spoken word around the world as well as in Sydney. And he's also been writing he's written radio serials and plays for 2SER, 2FBI, and he's had 2 plays broadcast live from the Sydney Opera House. He's a great playwright. He's quite prolific. He's written one called Breakfast at Krishna's, The Chronic Ills of Robert Zimmerman, aka Bob Dylan, a lie, which was a hit at the Adelaide Fringe and has had several sold-out seasons in Sydney, and it's still touring. His brand new play is called Lenny Bruce, 13 Daze Un-Dug in Sydney, 1962, and it's premiering next week at the Bondi Pavilion. And I have Benito on the phone with me now because I'm desperate to find out about this story. It sounds fascinating. Hey, Benito.
Hi, Penny.
Hello, thank you for joining me. Now, he's a great person to write about, but tell us a little bit about the story. What drew you to the story in the beginning?
Well, I was actually approached by another writer and a journalist I know called Damien Kringas, who was doing the first of the research into this for a book he was writing, and then he offered me the rights to adapt the story to the stage for nothing but the ability to help him sell books, basically.
Right. Okay.
And so I did that, and because it's funny, it's something he said to me. There's sort of 3 generations. It's sort of the baby boomers, which he kind of is. They know about Lenny Bruce, and they know he came to Sydney, but they have no idea what happened because no one wrote about it. Even Lenny Bruce in his autobiography didn't write about it, and one of the biographers briefly mentions it, but no one really wrote about it. And then there's Gen X, which is kind of me, and we know about Lenny Bruce, but we have no idea he came to Australia, let alone Sydney, and hung out in the Cross for 2 weeks. And then there is Gen Y, who kept confusing him with Lenny Henry.
Oh, okay, yeah, of course. Now, you've done a huge amount of information. You've found a lot of information out about him. Where did you find it?
Well, like I said, Damien obviously had found some information, a lot of information already for the book that he was writing, and then I went out and I redid some of those interviews again with people like Sir Wayne Morrells Martin, who was like a King's Cross identity around the time, and who introduced Lenny Bruce to the exotic dancer Little Egypt at the Latin Quarter Club, and then there was Little Sammy Gaha, who was another King's Cross identity who's still alive, and he drove Lenny Bruce around. And in Sammy Gaha's fruit bowl in Nord's Wharf on the Central Coast, we found a reel-to-reel recording of the gig Lenny Bruce finally got to do at the Winter Garden Theatre in Rose Bay.
Oh, you're kidding. Was that was the one that he was allowed to do? So he did one?
Well, what happened is he was booked to play at Aaron's Hotel in the city, and he did a 9 o'clock show. He'd had a long flight, he'd had a little taste, he was, he was a little tired, shall we say, as they used to say about Mike Willesee, tired and emotional. Yeah. And he did a 9 o'clock show. Yeah. But then in the 11 o'clock show there was a certain actress who was apparently, as the bulletin referred to her, currently appearing in a show called Once Upon a Mattress, and she heckled Lenny. And he heckled back with what the newspapers described as the Lady Chatterley word.
Oh, okay.
And that's when things sort of got ugly. And then everything was sort of shut down for him, and people like Richard Neville and other people from the Sydney Push and such like tried to get him other shows at the universities, and they were all shut down. The Vice Squad were going after any pub that wanted to book him and threatening to take their liquor license. And then Lenny tried to score some medications, which he swears were for a particular illness he had, and he had a letter from his Dr. Rotenberg in America explaining that he needed to shoot up certain medications because of a hepatitis he contracted during the war. And he had a script from a doctor for the Sydney Push here, a guy called Dr. Rocky, which sounds completely above board, doesn't it, Dr. Rocky?
Dr. Rocky.
Dr. Rocky. So he had, but then the Vice Squad had a call out to Chemist in King's Cross, where Lenny was staying, not to honour the script. So then he did end up with more trouble with the Vice Squad, and there were things drawn up and letters that needed to be signed, or he would have to leave the country, and he ended up with 48 hours to either sign this document or get out of the country, and there was an Inspector Ferguson kind of on his back, as it were.
Yeah.
And things sort of got quite desperate. But then eventually Lee Gordon, who'd brought him out here, Lee Gordon did eventually convince the Winter Garden Theatre to put on a show there. There were cops in the audience, and we have a recording of that show. So the first act of the play is kind of us looking at, talking to these people like Cole Joy and Sir Wayne and Little Sammy about what actually happened, because it was 50 years ago, or 51 years ago now. Everyone has a completely different sort of version of what he said, you know. And then
he was
in the second act, we kind of look at what actually happened after that.
Oh, okay. But he'd just finished a season in London before he came here at Peter Cook's Establishment Club. So
that's right.
And that's the days. I mean, it was pretty heady days for Peter Cook too. That was the days of Derek and Clive. It's very naughty and probably acceptable in London. But did he have? Do you know if he had any other similar problems in other cities outside Sydney?
He was having a lot of problems in America.
Oh,
in London, he seemed to get by okay because they have this thing in the UK where all the clubs are private clubs and it's members only and all this sort of thing. So they can kind of do whatever they want. I think that's designed so that, you know, members of the Tory party can be whipped by nuns or something, I'm not sure. But they seem to have that all pretty under control. But in America, he was basically in all sorts of trouble. He was getting similar trouble. But coming to Australia was sort of like coming back to the 50s, you know. It was and in the play, it's kind of Sydney versus Lenny Bruce.
Yeah,
Sydney was like going to one of the backwaters of America.
Yeah. God, how embarrassing. No wonder there's no record of it.
Well, there are newspaper articles which we found, and there were some photos in the State Library. The State Library didn't know what the photos were of, but we told them who the people in the photos were. And this particular newspaper cover that quite upset him was after his gig, on the front of the Daily Mirror, they put a picture of him, and it basically had him doing a Nazi salute, because they'd cropped his fingers in a certain way. So
because
like
he's Jewish as well, isn't he?
He's Jewish, and he'd also served in the U.S. Navy in Italy against fascism. So he found it a little disconcerting, and the headline was sick. Sick jokes make audience ill, and that was the cover of the Daily Mirror the day after his show at Aaron's.
I love some of his quotes. One of the ones that came to mind when you were talking before is "Life is a four-letter word," and things like I think he said something like, "Even if you're not Jewish in New York and you're Catholic, you're really Jewish."
Well, that's it. I mean, we sort of he talked about he talks about how he neologizes the word Jewish, like to him, he's Jewish, but Ray Charles is Jewish, and he says to him all Italians are Jewish, which I was comforted by.
He talks a lot about like established religion, and he's quite profound. Like he said, like there's another quote here saying, "Every day people are straying away from the church and going back to God."
That's right.
Yeah, there's some great stuff, like really interesting, profound quotes that I've been able to find. But the other thing I was going to ask you is, do you, the way you said some people tried to get a show up for him, like a publicised show, like a bigger one. Quite often comedians, slip into Sydney and do a quick 5 minutes here and there. Do you think that once this play is up and running, that you might have people coming out of the woodwork, like sidling up, at one of the shows saying, "Yeah, I saw him do a quick 5 at blah, blah,"
No, because there wasn't really those sort of comedy clubs back then. And what he was doing, I mean, I've sort of said to people, what Bob Dylan was to popular music, he was to comedy, because the sort of comedy that he was doing, they weren't doing here. Here it was the mother-in-law jokes, who was that lady, who was that lady you're with. Whereas he didn't really consider what he was doing comedy. He called it a kind of philosophy. He just said, "I'm just being Lenny Bruce, I'm just standing there." But so he didn't, and we have particularly Damien, and then more myself, but more Damien originally. We really have locked in those days. And what's funny is that the last day we weren't totally sure about what had happened in between that last gig and him having to fly out of the country, because the 48 hours were up and he wouldn't sign this document saying he was a drug addict because he'd taken a disliking to Inspector Ferguson.
Right.
So he had to get out of the country. And but we found since then the actor we've cast, Sam Haft, who's playing Lenny Bruce, his mother was a dancer called Buster Skeggs.
Isn't that great?
And she had dinner with Lenny Bruce the night before he flew out. And Lenny Bruce was supposed to do a show with her, but all she found the next day was a note at the stage door saying, "I'm sorry, I had to fly home." So we had heard about this note, and then other people had said, "No, I don't think that story is true." But now we've cast the son of the woman who he
isn't that fantastic? I did read that, and what a great name she has too, Buster Skeggs.
When I heard the story from the director, I had to ring Sam Haft to check that his mother really was called Buster Skeggs before I went any further with that, and she was. Well, she still is.
Do you know what? I really wish that I'd known you were writing this, because about 6 months ago, I went to my next-door neighbour, a lovely old man that lives next door by himself. He had an 80th, and we're the nice neighbours that were invited along. We didn't know anyone else there. And because I had a background in stand-up, they seated me next to this man who was an old stand-up comedian, an old comedy writer. And he used to write for Graham Kennedy and Dave Allen. And he told me some stories about meeting Lenny Bruce when he was here.
Right. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I can't remember, the little gems that he was given, but he said he spent quite a long time talking to him in conversation. So I don't know where that was at. I can't remember. I probably had too much champagne, but I can't remember.
Well, we'll have to look into that for the next draft of the show.
He's quite an amazing man, and he's got some great stories, but from around that era. But the other thing I was going to say to you is that idea of once the play is out there and people know it's of interest to other people, you might have people coming up. I mean, I did a play at Belvoir Street once, and we'd done a lot of research. It was about Dylan Thomas. And, Dylan Thomas is Welsh. You don't expect his son to just walk into the foyer after the play and come up to you and go, well, there's bits in that play that aren't right. It was just, it's quite a bizarre thing.
Well, we have been in contact with Lenny Bruce's daughter, Kitty Bruce.
Yeah.
And she runs the Lenny's house as part of the Lenny Bruce Memorial Foundation. I can't remember the correct, but if anyone Googles Lenny Bruce, they'll get lennybruce.com, which is the website she runs, and she runs a charity called Lenny's House, which looks after homeless single women in America. And so we are actually, part of the book that Damien wrote, and from the play as well, we are making a donation to her, and that way she's sort of, cool with us, because obviously some of the stuff we're using transcripts of the recording that we've got, of Lenny's performance and stuff like that, and we're using her father as a character. So although obviously I'm having to guess at what Lenny said to Lee Gordon and Tina Date, who was the folk singer he hung out with and such like that, because I didn't speak to Tina, even though Damien did, but we did speak to Lana Cantrell, for example, who some of your listeners might remember, and she now lives in the States, but she was one of the support acts, and she was famously, for a period, rumoured to be married to Graham Kennedy.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it was a TV marriage of convenience.
Convenience. Now, tell me a little bit about the production. The play is directed by Lucinda Gleeson, and you've said about each other you inspire one another and you've found a common language. You've obviously worked together before, is that right?
Well, yes, she directed The Chronic Ills of Robert Zimmerman.
Right, okay.
So we worked together for years on that, and bickered and got on well, and we've been through all that, so we can kind of read each other.
Yeah, you create a shorthand. It's I know what you're saying. And tell me a little bit about the casting with Sam. Now, what made you feel like obviously it's important when you're writing about somebody that's well known and iconic like Lenny Bruce that you cast somebody that people can relate to as that character. What was it about him that drew you to him? Were you part of the casting process, or? Yeah, in a sense. I mean, Sam is a great performer, and he's also he's a performer and a musician. One of the things we did do, all the people who cast also play instruments. That way we don't have to hire a band as well. And there is some music in there, but Sam just really had a grasp on the character. I mean, I don't know if it's probably partly the fact that he is also Jewish, and he's very much into that. That helped him pick up the Yiddish. I put in the script, I guess. Yeah. And he comes from a show business family like Lenny Bruce. I mean,
he's the son of Buster Skeggs. Lenny Bruce was the son of an exotic of a dancer. His mother was a dancer, and he was from a show business family. Was very much brought up in that show business milieu. His mother used to take him to strip clubs when he was a kid because she thought it was important for him to see truth, and that sort of, I guess, in some ways created that idea he had. He didn't like mendacity. He didn't like lying. So
there's that great quote from him too. Children ought to watch pornographic movies. It's healthier than learning about sex from Hollywood.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, as he said at one point when he did that final gig and there were police in the audience, he said, instead of the four-letter word that that I can't say because I don't want to get arrested, I'll just say the word kill.
Right.
And that's another four-letter word, and you all know what I mean, because he used to talk about how it's all right to show people killing one another. I mean, you can play a film of Christ being crucified, but you can't show people making love.
Yeah.
So he always he found that a bit of a contradiction. Yeah. So Sam is from that sort of Jewish show business background, and that I think helps. We've also got Lenore Munro, who was the actress in Chronicles of Robert Zimmerman.
Oh, okay.
Who's very musical and who played a whole lot of different roles in that, and she plays a whole lot of different roles in this, as do Dorji and Damien. They sort of play all the different characters that were around Lenny, including everyone from Lee Gordon to Frank Sinatra, basically.
Yeah. Oh, wow, it sounds fantastic. Now, it opens on the 10th of April and it runs until the 4th of May, is that right?
That's right, yes.
And we're going to give away some tickets.
Yes, so give away some tickets for the Friday the
12th.
12th, that's right, yes.
Well, people, if you would like to go along and see this show, it sounds fabulous, Benito. I really want to see this. 13 Daze Un-Dug in Sydney, 1962, about Lenny Bruce. And we've got 2 tickets to give away on Friday the 12th. Give me a call on 9419-6969. And one more quote that I wanted to share with you, which I thought was fabulous. If Jesus had been killed 20 years ago, Catholic school children would be wearing little electric chairs around their necks instead of crosses.
There you go.
Fabulous.
Well, actually, one interesting quote he said when he was here, he said apparently, allegedly, to Lee Gordon, he said, making me play Aaron's Hotel was the equivalent of booking Herman Goring to do a Jewish charity dance.
Yes. Look, there's so many great quotes, and I think it's going to be such a great play. Thank you for sharing that with us today, that story.
Thank you, Penny.
It's fabulous. Thanks, Benito. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That's Benito Di Fonzo, the writer of Lenny Bruce, 13 Daze Un-Dug in Sydney, 1962. If you want those tickets, give me a call, 9419-6969.